How old was Jacob when he married Leah and Rachel? Now, the Bible doesn't actually tell us directly how old he was. In my experience, most people in the church, especially, who look into it, assume he was in his 40s. And this is because we have, prior to the story of him meeting Leah and Rachel and that whole thing, we have his birth, we have him buying the birthright for a mess of pottage, and then we have the deception and getting the blessing when he disguised himself as Esau. And then he flees up to go and he meets his wives. And so people assume that these things all happened in rapid, or one right after the other. And while the Bible doesn't tell us directly, it does give us the information we need to calculate his age when he married his wives. So let us look at this and let us see if the general assumption of in his 40s is accurate. But see, the dates that are given in the Bible for us to work with are given in his later years, so we have to work backwards. So for instance, Genesis chapter 47 verse 9 states this. This is after Jacob has come into Egypt. He's talking to Pharaoh. Pharaoh asks him a few questions, and in response, Jacob says, "The days of the years of my pilgrimage are 130 years." So when Jacob came into Egypt with his family, he was 130 years old. Now we also read in Genesis 41, verse 46, "And Joseph was 30 years old when he stood before Pharaoh, king of Egypt." Now this is just after he interpreted the dreams of Pharaoh. So he's 30 years old. After that, we have the 7 years of plenty and 2 years of famine before Jacob comes into Egypt. That's 7 plus 2 is 9. If Joseph was 30 when he stood before Pharaoh, he is now 39 when Jacob comes to Egypt. Now, if Joseph is 39 when Jacob comes to Egypt, and Jacob is 130, then we subtract the 39 from the 130, and we know that Joseph was born when Jacob was 91 years old. So how old was he when he married Leah and Rachel? Well, it states in Genesis chapter 30, verse 25, and then verses 27 to 28. Jacob has just worked 7 years for Rachel, tricked into marrying Leah, and works another 7 years. At the end of the 7 years, it states, "And it came to pass when Rachel had borne Joseph, that Jacob said unto Laban, Send me away, that I may go unto mine own place and unto mine own country." So it's after the 7 years, the second 7 years, that Joseph is born. It's at the end of those 7 years. Joseph is born, and then Jacob decides he wants to go home. And in response to this, Laban says unto him, "I pray thee, if I have found favor in thine eyes, tarry, for I have learned by experience that the Lord hath blessed me for thy sake." And he said, "Appoint me thy wages, and I will give it thee." Okay. So Joseph was born at the end of the second 7 years, but before the 6 years that Jacob worked for wages. So we take the 7 years and subtract it from the 91 that Jacob was when Joseph was born. And 91 minus 7 is 84. Therefore, Jacob was 84 years old when he married Leah and Rachel. If you go back to the beginning, the first 7 years he worked for, when he first met Leah and Rachel, 84 minus 7 is 77. So he was 77 years old when he fled from Esau, went up and met Leah and Rachel. 84 when they married, and in the course of 7 years, he had 12 children. He also married 2 more wives, had 12 children. Because he had his 11 sons and 1 daughter. Benjamin would be born somewhat later. But all of this is calculated from the Bible. Not stated directly in the story itself, but from other information that we find, we can calculate his age. He was not in his 40s. He was 77 when they met, 84 when they married. And this is what the Bible tells us.